I think it was just because I didn't have any boundaries or parameters on that goal. Nothing wrong with training for a half marathon and doing it diligently. And, I love discipline. I love, routine. I love structure. But it came to the point where I thought I had control, but it was actually controlling me.
It's our limiting beliefs that ultimately keep us from becoming the best we're capable of becoming. Something's got to change, but that change has to happen first on the inside. It's time to get unstuck. It's time to get your why back. It's never too late. Let's start today.
Helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. This is Win Today. And now, here's your host, Christopher Cook.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. Thanks as always for the download. This is episode 145 of Win Today, and this is your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. So glad you're here today. With everything you have going on in your life, even right now, maybe you're driving into class or driving to work or taking care of your family or on a run. Does it ever seem like you still have to find your purpose, or that you're just stuck with a lot of unanswered questions about your true desires for life? And if you're anything like me, you probably feel the pressure to prove yourself and worry about what others will think, right? Well, honestly, it's been one of the greatest challenges in my own life and something I've walked through in the last few months. Just like, I'm not sure I'm enough. I'm not sure I have what it takes. But see, what I've learned is that if I let myself, I'll always be waiting for some distraction to end before I can really get down to the work of owning my everyday life and living in my true identity. Well, that's the topic of today's conversation, and that's the story of our guest today, Jordan Lee Dooley. From accidentally starting a small business instead of using her college degree, to embarrassing herself on stage in front of thousands, to wasting time worrying about what others think or say, Jordan Lee Dooley knows exactly how that feels, and she's learned some important lessons about living a purposeful life along the way. As an influential millennial widely recognized for her tagline turned international movement, "Your brokenness is welcome here," Jordan has become a go-to source that people around the world look to for inspiration in their faith, their work, their relationships, and their everyday life. So in today's practical and really candid conversation, through the lens of Jordan's new book, Own Your Everyday, you're going to learn how to tackle obstacles such as disappointment, perfectionism, comparison, and distraction. You're going to understand how to remove labels and break out of the box of unrealistic expectations put on you by others and yourself. Then, you'll be able to identify and eliminate excuses and unnecessary stress about an unknown future while overcoming the lie that you can't live your God-given purpose until you reach a certain goal or milestone. It's time to own your everyday and push aside the weight of insecurity and shame once and for all. And it's time to jump into my conversation with Jordan Lee Dooley right now. Jordan, I'm so glad you're here today. Welcome.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Jordan, how do you go from drifting through life to owning your everyday? Take us back into your story.
Yeah. So when I was a college student, I was wrapping up my college career and I was studying healthcare administration, which is basically business with a healthcare focus. And wasn't all that thrilled after having gone to several interviews and doing some internships. I was like, maybe I picked the wrong thing. And I think we all can feel that at some point in our lives when we're not super thrilled with what we're doing. And I had a conversation, actually, of course, with mom, who gives better advice than your mom. And so I told her, I said, I'm just not thrilled about this. And I know I've worked really hard toward it. And we put all this time and money and whatnot into it. And I'm really not sure what to do if I'm not really wanting to do this with my life. Like, am I stuck? And she kind of looked at me. She's like, well, then just don't do it. I was like, well, that's not very helpful. What am I supposed to do? And ended up, she really explained, while you're finishing up school, while you have this, kind of free time outside of class and, homework and whatnot, you're not paying mortgages yet and all of that. She's like, explore some things that interest you. Explore, go back to, you're so creative, but you've kind of stifled that working so hard at school and just tracing this kind of next step. Give yourself a little freedom to explore. And I think, I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm an achiever. I'm so achievement oriented that sometimes I will sacrifice doing things that actually are life-giving for me because I'm trying to hit the next achievement or the next benchmark. And so her advice was like, basically explore and experiment before you have a perfect plan. Like, it's okay to take imperfect action and just try some things. And so after several different things I would try, from modeling to that didn't go anywhere. I was like, oh, maybe I'll be like a commercial model. Didn't work out. I ended up eventually stumbling into doing kind of some online crafting. Or not online craft. I was selling my crafts online. Like, I would create like canvases, and I was doing a lot of hand lettering because that was kind of starting to become popular. And I was starting to figure out like the internet space, and I ended up building a little business from my sorority storage closet. I was, finishing up school, living in a sorority, and doodling on canvases and mugs and journals and all these different items I could buy at Hobby Lobby. And then I would have sorority sisters ask me to create things for their sister's wedding next summer, or, just different things like that. And then I started putting it online, and it grew relatively quickly. And my sorority sisters would help me package and ship, and, they'd support the dream that I didn't even really know I had. I was just having fun, and it grew and it grew. And what I found was, as I was sitting there packaging with all these friends, over pizza and, just doing all this, we would just have great conversation. And I would start sharing content, which I didn't even realize I was creating content at the time, alongside, whatever I was posting online when it came to my items and my shop and the little side hustle I created. And that really resonated. And I would watch how a post would go up, and it was not like I didn't have a huge audience or anything, but it would start getting all these shares. And then suddenly I had a bigger audience and a bigger audience. And I was like, what is this? What's happening? So what I realized was the art of storytelling and content creating really opened up so many more doors for me than just maybe selling mugs out of my storage closet, and I started to really steward that and focus on that. And it kind of led to speaking, and it led to podcasting several years down the road. And it's led to book writing, and it's led to building that online shop more, putting a movement on it. It really grew when we put a phrase on it that really resonated with people, made them feel like, they were welcomed and loved, and it gave them a tool to love other people, which was really, really cool. We had a tagline that said, "Your brokenness is welcome here," because I really felt like that was kind of the space we created when my friends and I were sitting there packaging these things. Somebody would be going through a breakup, and another person would be struggling with insecurity, and another person would be struggling with something else. And so it really kind of became a place of wholeness. It became a place of welcoming, regardless of the ways we didn't feel so whole. And so to see how once we put that online and how many people ate it up, that actually allowed the shop that I had started as a little hobby to grow into a full-blown thing. And now people have, thousands and thousands of people have worn that phrase on sweatshirts and t-shirts. And so because that grew, that allowed me some freedom to go, okay, well, I'm going to try a couple other things. And now we've built out kind of a whole, that's a small part of my brand now, but that little start led to really creating content as a full-time job. Writing books, speaking, podcasting, all of those things. So it's been really crazy to see how, doodling on mugs as a senior in college when you don't know what you want to do with your life, to now flash forward several years and doing something completely different than what I ever anticipated doing.
Wow. Amidst doing all of that, because today the focus of our conversation is wholeheartedness and being present and getting past the perfectionism. As someone dominant in Enneagram Type 3 who is an achiever, how much of your personal worth and value is contingent upon the likes and the sales and the affirmation you were getting from everyone around you?
All of it. No. It can sometimes feel like all of it. It can sometimes feel like that's the thing, that's the focus, that's what matters. But for me, I think why that story is, I always come back to it, and why I love to tell it and remind myself of it, is because when I was given permission, right, to just kind of stumble into some things, try some things that I'm not, you don't have to be the expert, and you don't need to build $1 million company out of it. It's just like, I was just given permission to explore and experiment. It was like there was this weird freedom for me to step into something I'm unsure of and take the risk and be okay with if it doesn't work out. And so I think that's why this book and also just this message is so powerful for me, because it reminds me to be grounded and to not think so far ahead and I think future orientedness is so important for, goals and getting ahead, but pairing that with my natural drive to, work on things like achievement and get really sucked into things like numbers, like you said, like how much of your worth goes into it. It's like so easy for us to put our worth in how well we achieve our goals, or what somebody, how they respond, or how many sales we have, or whatever. And so I think that phrase, when I go back, to that first starting point when I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go to Hobby Lobby, and like, no one sees this. This is not glamorous, but I'm just going to try it. Like, the pressure was off in that situation. I was just owning my everyday. And every little pivot I've made along the way that's been successful, whether that's leading into business coaching or, speaking or podcasting, those types of things have been little pivots where I've actually allowed myself to kind of breathe and go, you know what? I'm going to take that pressure off for a sec. I'm going to see what's really the best next step or what really brings me life, regardless of whatever the outcome is. So I've been able to kind of work through my own story, that natural tendency through those pivots, through those little decisions to be like, you know what, I'm just going to implement what I can right now and be okay with the outcome, because as long as it impacts, that's what matters most. And so getting into that mindset helps me kind of fight that a little bit, because it is such a natural, it is such a natural like struggle. It's like an ongoing battle, so allowing yourself to like, I'm just going to show up and own this where I'm at, outcome aside, that really has allowed me to have a lot of little wins throughout the way or along the way.
Yeah. Talking about those little pivots you made, then the question I'd love to ask Jordan is that, do you think our personal purpose then is something we have to find externally, or is it something we discover first on the inside as we increase in our identity in how God has wired us?
My biggest thing that I discovered throughout this whole crazy process and journey is that so many of us are like searching for the purpose, right? We say, I need to find my purpose. I need to go after my dream. And I kind of had to figure it out. And I'm like, no, I think we're going to be really disappointed if we think of it like that. Because if we wrap it up into something that we can find, such as a certain job or position or opportunity, those might really bring our purpose alive, right? They might be way more in line with our gifts and our abilities and where we need to be walking. But I had this big realization that like, no, the purpose is inside. We don't like discover it somewhere. And I think we have to remember we have the opportunity and the privilege to bring it to specific positions. I think we often think those specific positions will give it to us, right? Like, well, when I start that podcast, or when I become a doctor, or when I get that next, whatever the milestone is, we often try to put it there. And then my argument for that was like, well, hold on, because if you suddenly are no longer a podcaster, or you suddenly, have to, or you retire from being a doctor, or, whatever the position is, does that mean that your purpose just like went along with it? So it kind of is like a perspective shift and a mindset shift I think we have to make if we're going to be intentional and really win in the areas that we are assigned to and that we have the option to work in and live in and play in. Giving those things, I guess, bringing like those specific places, our significance to those specific places makes such a difference in how we approach what we're actually doing. And it makes those places more enjoyable, even if they're not ultimately where we want to be. So yeah, I don't think it's something you find outside yourself. I think it's something you bring to the places that you go.
It's really interesting you went there, because one of the principles I teach when I speak is the bad math of if plus when equals then. In other words, if I achieve this or gain his or her approval by this certain amount of time, then I'll be respected or heard or seen or known. And that's such an insidious cycle. So let's go from theory to experience to practice. How did you do that in your own life?
Yeah. I think, for me, like I said, being okay with, I'm a very multi-passionate person, right? So I think that equation really, and kind of what you just explained, really resonates with me, because I think we can sometimes feel like, well, it's this, and then this will happen, right? And for me, it's like I've had the most nonlinear journey, and things have happened that like I personally, I'm like, there's no explanation for this other than God, because I wasn't even planning to go there, right? Like I didn't even strategize this step, or there's certain steps that I have strategized, but I think we can think that way. And there's also been times where I've tried to do things thinking that there would be this great outcome, and I've been totally disappointed. And so, for example, we created a course not too long ago, but a while back, and I was like, this is going to be it. Like, this is going to be the shift. This is going to be like the thing, and I did all the steps. I set it up properly. I did all the, pre-marketing, all the things. And it did not go where I anticipated. It was actually now something that we're kind of pulling off, because I'm like, well, okay, I was wrong. And so it reminded me that the success that I was anticipating and thinking of would have been wrapped up in that, so long as I followed this procedure and I set it up for success, but it really wasn't what was being asked of me. It really wasn't actually solving the problem. I actually overlooked what I really needed to be focused on, because I thought I just liked it. I liked the idea. And so it taught me a lot about, it's not just about having the perfect, foolproof process or steps. It's also really knowing your audience and understanding what they want from you and how you can best serve And then that's when things will be successful. Because there's been other times on the flip side where I didn't have the foolproof process and I didn't have even the steps that I thought that I needed because I didn't know at the time. And I would put something out there and it would be eaten up, right? It was like an accidental victory. And so I think it kind of, both those situations have proved me wrong sometimes, as much as I think process and planning and trying to be intentional about our steps is key. Believing the lie that like, well, if I do this, this will be my outcome. And it's like, not necessarily, because there's so much more that goes into that. So I've kind of had to learn that on the hard way, I would say, in both successes and in failures.
Jordan, how do you combat the pressure of chronology? We're both millennials, and I think our generation is poised for absolute greatness. I think we get a lot of bad rap, honestly. In other words, a lot of us millennials wonder why we're here at this stage of life instead of there, because of societal pressure, social media, internal believed lies. How do you combat that pressure?
Yeah, for me, I think it's really a couple things. One, having boundaries is really big for me, because especially being an achiever, and then also, like you said, being very chronological and very like exactly what you just said. One big thing that I wrote about this in the book, and I really realized it in my own life through a variety of different experiences. But, we hear so much about setting goals and going after goals, and I'm here for it. Like, I am the goal girl, I'm a goal getter for sure. But I think what I found was, if I'm not pairing those goals with any boundaries, I tend to become obsessed with those goals, and I actually miss out on how to like breathe. And when we are so much about hitting that benchmark, hitting that goal, improving or impressing that person, or, getting that position, or whatever that thing is that we think is the next step, that like chronological mindset that you're talking about, as much as I think being driven towards those goals is key, I've found in my own life that those can also be very damaging if I become obsessive about them. Like, we hear a lot about, like, you've got to obsess after your goal to get after it and to make it happen. And I'm like, well, then you actually are putting so much pressure on yourself and that goal. And if it doesn't pan out that way for one reason or another, you're going to actually be in much worse shape than you were beforehand. And so like a perfect example was when I was in college and I decided I want to get in better shape and I want to run a half marathon. Okay, great goal, great ambition. But then, I wrote about this whole story in the book where that goal basically took over my life. I ended up becoming so extreme with beyond training. I was like severely limiting my food intake. I lost a ton of weight, which I thought was amazing at the time. Turns out it was completely unnecessary, actually quite harmful. And I had, like, looking back several years now, I'm like, I think it was just because I didn't have any boundaries or parameters on that goal. Nothing wrong with training for a half marathon and doing it diligently. And like, I'm most disciplined, I love discipline. I love, routine. I love structure. But it came to the point where I thought I had control, but it was actually controlling me. And so one thing about that is, well, what if I put some boundaries on the goals that I have? For example, going along with that example, if I'm going to go to the gym, 5 days a week to try to get in shape, I need to put a little bit of a boundary around that so that I'm not spending 4 hours at the gym when I start seeing progress, getting really excited, trying to drop the weight faster or whatever, or build the muscle faster, and now suddenly I'm spending way too much time at the gym, or I'm doing extra workouts before bed because I'm now becoming so obsessed with the numbers and the specific number goal that I've missed the whole point of what I'm even doing. And so maybe the boundary there is, I'm going to go 5 days a week, but I'm going to do 30-minute workouts and call it a day at 30 minutes and just give my best in those 30 minutes so that you're not becoming obsessed with what you're actually doing. So that's kind of how I combat that pressure, because if I look at all these things that I'm trying to go after, this next step that I either perceive I'm supposed to take, or I want to take, or I feel like I need to take, putting a little bit of boundaries around, okay, I'm going to work toward that, but I'm not going to work on Sundays, right? Like, creating some little boundaries like that around those goals help keep them in check while also helping us pursue the next step that we really want to take.
I want to push this button a little further, Jordan, because I think what you're saying is so important, and you're operating through the lens of someone who's very driven, very achievement motivated, which is incredible. But on the flip side of that, you can be ultra hard on yourself. So talk to everyone listening today who is driven like you are, who dreams the big dreams, who sets discipline and schedules in place and wants to go for it. What does it look like for you to be really hard on yourself? And what does it look like for you to not give yourself grace?
Yes. I really have a hard time personally, like most achievers and most dreamers, with feeling like you didn't get the outcome you wanted. So for me, when I'm really hard on myself, it looks a lot like, well, why would I try this again? Like, it can be very debilitating when I let that kind of take over. Or it can be like, why'd you even try, right? And so then it makes you question even your motive and your heart and what you even did that for. And it kind of makes you rethink your entire life, I think, a little bit. Like, maybe I shouldn't even be going this direction, right? So I've had a lot of that. And I think, to answer your question about, did you ask how I give myself grace or what it looks like when I don't give myself grace?
You know what? Let's go both and, because yes. I think it is the question of how do you cope with that, and then what does it look like? Because the flip side of any strength, Jordan, and this is what I'm getting at, any strength overextended becomes a liability to us, and so your drivenness, your achievement mindedness. Overextended and under stress means the last person to receive grace is you. You beat yourself up saying, hey, if you would have done this, you would have had this outcome. So what does that space look like? How do you beat yourself up?
Yeah. Again, I think when I'm not giving myself grace, it's a lot of, I think the best way I can describe it is, it's almost like, well, I should never try that again. And then I'm on to the next thing where I'm not even allowing myself to really learn from it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I'm like, all right, well, that didn't work and I'm never trying that again. And I suck at that, but I'm going to try this thing over here because I know I can achieve that better. Right. So it's almost like I almost want to flush it and ignore it to the point where I don't actually see what value could come from it. So I feel to give myself grace in that regard where I'm immediately like, don't try it again. It's instead of adjusting and trying to kind of just make maybe a very small necessary tweak that could have changed it, I almost want to be like, we're just going to wash our hands of that. I don't want to touch it anymore. Right. So that's when I'm not operating in a healthy place. When I'm operating from a healthy place and when I'm, focusing on, all right, I'm going to see how I can give myself grace here, which it varies depending on the season and, the mindset and all of the different things. But I would say when I'm operating from that healthy place and really giving myself grace through those challenges, for me, it's asking the question, okay, if I didn't get the outcome I wanted, what lesson maybe did I get the lesson I needed? I heard this, I was at a conference not too long ago, and one of the speakers said, it's not failure. It's you either get the outcome you wanted or the lesson you needed. So hearing that very simple mindset shift on this idea of, oh, it didn't go how I wanted or failure or whatever, it's allowed me to kind of start looking through the lens of, okay, but what lesson is coming from this? And so when I'm coming from a healthy place, I'm learning from it, which is interesting, but it's either like ignoring it or learning from it, I think are usually my two go-tos. And I can be really intentional that I'm hopefully learning something from it and readjusting and trying again.
Jordan, one of the things in hearing your story thus far, even as driven as you are and as goal-oriented as you are, I know in life we can't go at this thing alone. We can't create wins in our life alone. So I'd love to ask about your relationship with your grandmother, because I know she played a pivotal role in your life. She was a safe person. She was an encouraging person. Talk about that relationship with her before she passed.
Yeah, so when my grandmother was a young mom, she had 4 children, and she immigrated from Mexico to the United States after losing her husband to a massive heart attack. So she had these 4 little ones, and my mom was the youngest, and she was her only daughter. She was only 2 years old, never knew her father because he passed away when she was so young. And my grandmother was an immigrant going through tragedy and raising these 4 kids. So when my mom was a little girl, she wasn't able to be as present with her as she probably would have liked to because she was mourning. She was trying to make a way. She was trying to survive. She was taking care of her children. Her mother was also living with her. So, flash forward 20, 25 years when I came along, long after she had processed that grief and, all of that, she called me her second chance. And so from the very beginning, she and I were very, very close because I was her granddaughter that lived as close to her and also the only granddaughter that came from her daughter. And so she and I were from the beginning just the best of friends. She, was there when I was born. She gave me my first bath. I mean, it's like that. She was like kind of like a second mom. And so growing up, I would just spend a lot of time with her. She was very much involved. She'd come over probably every evening after work and play with us, my sibling and I, for a little while, and grew in that relationship a lot. And, one big thing that I remember was she really did create a safe place, and she allowed me to dream. She allowed me to play make-believe. We would play make-believe for like hours. I mean, I would be the teacher and she would be the student. I would be the doctor and she would be the patient. And so we had this really neat dynamic where I could kind of, I think when you play make-believe and you allow yourself to imagine, it's kind of a vulnerable space. It's almost like allowing someone into your dreams. And you don't really even realize that as a kid. But I think there was several people who I wasn't comfortable doing that with, like I was actually pretty shy as a kid. And so to have that kind of come out of me with her, I look back and realize how much she dared me to dream and to think bigger and creatively and imagine what could be possible, And so we had that relationship. And then leading up to when I was getting older, growing up and going off to college and things like that, that's when she really started to get sick. And she ended up passing away my freshman year of college. But that whole relationship, and I think what was so sweet about it, what's so crazy about it is in those early years, she was kind of my safe place. She was like a refuge to me. She really created a place where I could imagine and dream, like I said. But what was crazy is we always switched roles. I wanted to be the grandma. She needed to be the baby, right? Like I wanted to be the doctor or the nurse so she could be the patient. But what's crazy is in her last years, our roles truly reversed. I mean, I started taking care of her like she had done when I was a little girl. I had to help feed her. I had to help change her. I had to help walk her, keep her walking, And so it really taught me like the importance of not only having that safe place and that place where you can kind of breathe and just imagine and dream, but also how much so often allowing ourselves to go there, it really actually prepared me for that switch, for when our roles truly switched, when sometimes things actually change. So it was a really sweet and special relationship. And in so many ways, there were so many layers to it that as I've gotten older, I've seen like just the little goofy things we would do prepared me for life, like taking big steps together or imagining and seeing our roles switch, in real life. But I was almost doing that so much as a child anyway. So it's a really, really special relationship in my life. And it really informed a lot of what I do now.
Let's stay there if we could, because I'd love to ask, adverse circumstances in life give us the opportunity to learn new things, right? Mm-hmm. As your role with her was reversed, what are some of the things that you learned, some of these core value principles that now undergird the way you live and the way you and Matt do your life together?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. One thing I would say is, so when we were little, or when I was little, she would help me walk by doing this thing called big step. And so we'd stick our leg out really far and dramatic, and we'd like claim this next step ahead of us. And the reason I think that's so significant is because a lot of times when we are making decisions or stepping into new seasons or, new chapters of our business, of our life, of our marriage, it can feel like a really, really big step, right? Those new opportunities that we see. And so one big thing that I remember when I look back at the big steps that I took as a little girl, I was like, but the thing is, she was holding my arm. So it's never something you do by yourself. We did it together. And the other thing that I think really reminds me of how to make big decisions and transitions and step into new opportunities and new spaces is that a big step is really just a series of small movements adding up over time, right? Even though it's a quick thing. Ultimately, if you break down what a big step is, it's you first lift your toe, right? Then you peel the toe off the ground, then you lift your leg, then you extend your leg. It's all these small motions that add up to a bigger thing. So the reason that's so significant in our lives is because, we are dreamers. We're big dream chasers. He was in and out of the NFL, we've tried to go after these things and just go after life with complete reckless abandon. And sometimes those things can feel like really big steps. But when we're trying to make a decision, when we're trying to decide, are we going to go for this next big opportunity? Are we going to take the risk, right? It can feel so intimidating and so daunting. And so that's why breaking it down and going, but what actual small steps have prepared us to actually land the plane, right? To actually put our foot down and claim that next step and that next ground rather than just kind of hovering over it and waiting. So thinking in that way helps us break down the big things in our lives, those big opportunities, those big milestones, into something a little bit more manageable and realizing, we actually are more prepared than we even feel, because those things can be so overwhelming, whether it's buying a house or, moving in or moving to a different place or starting a new career or opening a new part of our company or whatever these kind of seemingly larger things are. Breaking it back down to the smaller things really allows us to, I think, examine those decisions more intentionally and make a better decision about, are we going to put the foot down, or are all those movements that really need to be there first before actually landing that, have those been there? And are we as prepared as we want to be, even if we don't feel prepared? And that was so helpful.
Yeah. And I think when we're in that process, at least for me, none of us are free from obstacles while we're going after exactly the things you said. In your book, you talk about the toxic trio, and I want to drill down on this because everyone listening right now has to deal with them at one point or another in life. We've talked a little bit about how you cope through some of the things internally in your own world, but Jordan, could we just stay there? And I'd love to ask again, insecurity, expectations, and the pressure to prove yourself. What does that battle look like for you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I really think that when your own insecurities pair with either your unmet expectations or someone else's expectations of you, or even expectations that you perceive others have of you, those things come together and create the pressure to prove. And that's so relevant in my life.
That's good.
That's exactly what it is. That's how the toxic trio works. And man, there's been so many situations in my life. Even going back to the example that I was saying with my mom, when she told me, hey, just try some stuff, right? Basically what happened there, and I kind of share this in the book too, my insecurity about, well, maybe I chose the wrong thing. Maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, right? Like that, all that is insecurity. I now feel like I'm on shaky ground because I'm not excited about this. I feel not solid in this decision. And then I was doubting my own decisions leading up until that point. Why did I pick this as my degree? It's too late to change, right? All this stuff. And the reason that's so significant is because it made it harder when I was like, I know that my parents want me to work in corporate America. I know that they want me to like lead a team in a big company and be a career woman and all this stuff. And that's actually when I was talking with my mom, and she was, then I felt like, oh, well, now I have to prove it to them. So then it kind of just swelled, and I felt so afraid to actually tell her, hey, I'm not actually as thrilled about this as I wanted to be, and I'm actually doubting the whole decision to begin with. I just felt like I'm a failure of a daughter, right? Because I needed to prove that I went through college and I was successful, and I'm going to, be successful in the way that I perceive everybody wants me to be. And what was so shocking to me when I was sitting there talking with her, having these expectations that I perceived she had for me. And she goes, well, just don't. We had this whole conversation that, that kind of led, or that her suggestion to not led to, because I said, what do you mean don't? And she's like, I don't know where you got the idea that this is like your only option and this is what you're supposed to do, but like, we're going to be proud of you regardless, so long as you're doing something and working hard and doing something you are passionate about. So the reason that's so significant is because I had created the pressure to prove in myself, because I paired my insecurities about what, I might be stepping into or not sure of with perceived expectations that I thought my parents had of me or that my family had of me that they didn't even have, right? So I'm like, I was under an unnecessary pressure to prove that this is the only thing, and now I'm stuck, and now I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And that's just one of many examples, but that's typically how it works. Our own insecurities, and then we look at whether it's our unmet expectations, like, man, I thought I'd be further by now. Man, I thought I'd have, my mortgage paid off by now. Man, I thought I would be further in my career by now. Or, I know my husband wants me to be making more money. Or I know this, we like create these expectations in our mind, and when we're not hitting that, and our insecurity pairs with it, that's when we like almost get trapped into this pressure to prove. And that's generally when we start to feel stuck. So that's just one example, but that's typically how it works out in my life.
And when your mom said that to you, how did that feel?
I was shocked. I remember I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, try some stuff. And I'm like, this is the worst mom advice ever. Like, are you supposed to tell your kid not to take a job, like to just try stuff? She's like, I'm not saying, she went on and explained, I'm not saying quit your responsibilities. I'm not telling you to drop out of school, like finish what you started, finish out your commitment, but don't believe the lie that you only have one option. Create options for yourself. And, I think it was very relieving for me. And I think it was very eye-opening for me too. And I think it taught me so much. I've taken that story and that experience into pretty much everything that I've done, because there's been other situations where in a totally different, 5-10 years later, whatever, there's going to be other times when I feel that same expectation, and how powerful it is just to have the conversation, right? And how relieving it is to sometimes find out, oh, you know what, actually, I've just made up some of this pressure in my own mind. So there's been times in my career where I'm like, oh, you know what? I probably shouldn't do this project because as much as I'm excited about it, I don't think I'm qualified enough. And my audience expects me to do this. So this would be super off base. And so I just need to keep going with what I'm doing, proving to them that I'm what they expect, right? And then it's hilarious because then it comes up 2 weeks later or 2 months later and someone's like, hey, do you think you could create this project? Or do you think you could help us with this thing? And I'm like, what? I thought that was so outside your expectations for me. So sometimes you'll be, or I've been in so many situations relieved and surprised by how often my own idea of what success is and also what other people or what I even need to, whatever expectation I need to be living into, it's generally a little bit off because of our own insecurity. So yeah, it's crazy. I was I was so relieved.
Well, it sounds like, Jordan, when you're in the process of all that, it sounds like, much like me, you were overthinking things. I am like at the front of the lines when it comes to Captain Overthink. And so for me, Jordan, overthinking is baked in fear and fear of rejection, honestly. So how about you in that space, overthinking? And
Yeah. Man, fear of rejection is tough. And I'm such an overthinker. I mean, I wrote about this in the book too. But I think when we begin to overthink, it comes back to that toxic trio, that thing that's driving it, that internal insecurity paired with expectations, creating this pressure to prove. I think a lot of the reason I've been an overthinker in many situations is generally because I'm trying to prove something to myself or to others, like, that I'm successful at this, or that this will have the outcome that I expect, or that I think others expect. And so the reason I tend to get stuck in overthinking, and it's usually big opportunities. I don't know if you're like this, but generally when I feel like I'm overthinking, it's when I want to make a pivot, when I want to try something new, or when there's a big opportunity that I'm not entirely sure what the outcome of it will be. Is that kind of when you tend to overthink as well?
100% of the time, because much like you, as a goals-oriented, driven type A personality who makes lists for lists, when especially when I've experienced failure in an area of life before, not only is there an aspect by which I'm gun-shy to go forward in that same area again. I'll just be simple. Like, Jordan, I'm buying a new car. I'm going to read every line of that contract because I do not want to make a mistake. So yes, to answer your question, for sure.
Yes. That's the thing. It's big opportunities or big decisions. And I mean, there's so many times where I end up when I overthink, I distract myself. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to do a mind numbing activity right now. Like, I'm overthinking it. And so it's funny because I'm still overthinking it, but I'm almost like dodging having to make the decision or having to follow through or having to finalize, like you said, sign the contract or whatever the thing is. It's like, yeah, we'll talk about that later. And what I'm ultimately doing is overthinking rather than just getting down to it, looking at the facts and then making an informed decision and calling it a day and taking action. It's like, yeah, but this could go wrong. And that's not super clear to me, and okay, well, what if I mess this up? And so then I almost become overwhelmed by the decision or the step or the, opportunity itself, even if it's a wonderful thing, because I'm afraid to make the wrong decision. I mean, that goes back to the story I was telling. It was like, oh my gosh, did I make the wrong decision? I totally made the wrong decision. I can't do this with my life. What am I going to do? Right. And it turned into this tornado in my brain for weeks until I had this conversation with my mom, and she's just like, so don't, simplifies it, right? Just super simplifies it. And I think that has been a helpful thing for me to come back to. I always go back to some of these stories in my own life because it helps me remember, wait a second, there actually isn't a pressure there. And it's actually going to be okay. And I think we fear making the wrong decision a lot, but even like I said, we're either going to get the outcome we wanted or the lesson we needed. And I think sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important, or the most important lessons to learn are usually the hardest to learn, which is unfortunate, but it teaches you to be more diligent, more more intentional with the decisions you're making, reading through every line of contracts. But I don't think that's necessarily overthinking. I think that's wise to be informed. I think it's overthinking when you know all the facts and you know what's, the next step, and you have as much information as you possibly can to make a smart decision, and you still sit on it because you have this weird idea that well, what if it's wrong? And it could be wrong. That's the risk we take when we operate from a place of action and a place of intention. And even if it is quote unquote wrong, it's not the end of the world so long as we're willing to say, okay, what have I learned and what lesson can I take to apply to the next time I do this? It's hard to do that, especially when it's that's so much easier said than done. But I've had to kind of really wrap my brain around that, because otherwise I will sit on decisions for a long time. I'm an action taker, I'm a doer, but I've had enough situations where because I'm an action taker and a doer, I almost act too quickly. So I turn me kind of into a little bit of an overthinker, because it's so easy to be like, well, the last time, and replay those situations like you said. So I think for me, it's been really big to look at the situations where I've overthought before and then realized, but when I finally did take the action, here's the good that came from it, and kind of revisiting those things versus revisiting this failed before, that kind of thing.
Yeah. How do you define success then, Jordan?
Yeah, I define success on both a macro and a micro level because I don't know why, but I feel like we often talk about success as, the big thing. When we hit the salary number, when we get this house, when we're happy, when we have a family, when we have all these things. And so I think that definitely can be a form of success. I think that can definitely be a form of winning after, years of working hard and doing things to work toward those things. But for me, I know, especially as a very future-oriented, goal-oriented person, if I get too caught up in these bigger macro, forms of success, I actually am not very successful in my day-to-day life. And so I kind of had to redefine success for myself on a micro level, on a small level. And I was like, what are my daily success factors? What are those little things that if I go to bed every night looking at the day of today was a success, I accomplished what I said I was going to do, and I was intentional with those things, then even if I haven't hit that bigger goal, that macro type of success, I'm still living a successful life. And so some of those micro success factors for me are things like I prayed today. I was present with my husband today. I clocked out from work after 6 p.m. I kind of set up like 5 or 6 of these very simple daily success factors so that as I'm working toward those bigger things, I'm still experiencing success on a smaller daily level rather than looking at the day rather than looking at the days leading up to maybe whatever goal I'm chasing as like days I'm trying to get through. It actually allows me to become days that I really live through, days that I really actually experience success, even if those bigger things aren't, coming to fruition yet. So that's the best way I can say I describe success or I define success. It's kind of, I think it's 2-part, and we often focus on the one part.
Yeah, that's really good. How has your purview about your life, your potential, and your purpose changed? How did that change once you met your husband, Matt?
Yeah, I think it changed because it became not only my life. I think it opened my whole understanding. I actually wrote about this not too long ago because when we met, he was chasing after the NFL dream. I didn't even know what my dreams were. I had no idea what I was doing. And I think we all define those over time. But I was like, I don't really know what I want to do with my life. But he was pursuing the NFL very hard after playing 4 years of NCAA football. And so, getting to chase that dream with him and kind of going through the highs and lows of it and the roller coaster of it, it was like every high that he felt, I felt probably just as much, or if not as close as I possibly could. And every low that he felt was equally as devastating for me. And so, what I found through that journey, and then as he kind of closed that chapter of his life after a few years of being on and off teams and things like that, we started to pursue other dreams together. And then I started to have this dream of, I want to write a book and I want to do this, and I started to formulate my own kind of, here's what I kind of want to do. And both times, whether it was him chasing the NFL or me kind of launching a book and building a company and doing these things that I've been dreaming of, it's been so fun to run those races together. And what I found and what I've really learned through meeting him and through doing these things is when you love someone, their dreams kind of become your dreams too. And so even though I had, different goals and ambitions for myself, when he was going through all that, it was like it became fully focused on how do we get this dream to come true for you? Okay, we'll move across the country. Okay, we'll put everything in storage. Okay, I'll go like hustle and work some side hustles so that you can train, and then on the flip side, it's now been kind of reversed. And so it's been just the last several years, we've really learned how much, not only is it about, your dreams and your perspective on your goals and your ambitions and the things you want to do, it's also so rooted in sometimes what cost comes at helping the person that you love or the person that you're partnered with now for life. Like, how does that shift the way that you pursue dreams, and how do you take on and really be willing to sacrifice for the sake of theirs to come true, or to support what they're going after? And so it's been a really sweet story. It's been a really fun thing, but it really taught me how important it is to really own even their dreams as your own and go after them with the same reckless abandon that you would if it were your own.
That's such solid advice. Jordan, as we're finishing our conversation today, and it's been so enriching for me, is there anything else we haven't talked about today that you just love to leave with the listeners?
Oh gosh, I think one big lesson that I, as an achiever, always have to remind myself, because it doesn't come naturally to me, and I'm such a cheerleader, but I think if I could leave him with anything, it would be to remember that it's important to go after those big, cool, extraordinary things. I think we've been given vision and we've been given gifts and abilities to do that. But just a little reminder that you can't do those big, cool, extraordinary things until you learn to show up for the small, not so cool, everyday things, because those really are those little motions that lead to those bigger steps that prepare you for those things. So I think when we can kind of get restless and frustrated and feel like we're in a season of waiting or the thing hasn't happened yet, remember that the everyday things really do lead to the extraordinary things over time. And that the best thing you can do is live like the person that you do see in your dreams before those dreams come true. Actively live into that, the person that's confident, the person that is intentional. I think we often see that version of ourselves when we get that job or when we have that next step or we get that opportunity or we find our person. And we don't allow ourselves to really live into who we're actually created to be, the people of purpose and intention that we're made to be before those dreams come true. So that's the best thing that I'm so passionate about passing on. It's like, go after the dream, please, but don't neglect who you are and becoming who you're supposed to be or you think you'll be once that dream comes true in the here and now. And remember to show up for those little everyday things along the way.
Yeah, friends, just show up. And after having listened to this conversation, I really pray and believe that you will take ownership and own your everyday. That, in fact, is the title of Jordan Lee Dooley's brand new book. It's available right now. Jordan, thank you for this really wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I have so much to say that I'm like, I hope this is making sense.
Oh, it's so good.
For it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being here, Jordan.
Absolutely. I appreciate being here.
Well, I hope you enjoy that conversation with Jordan. Again, you can get her brand new book, Own Your Everyday, right now. Links to purchase are at wintoday.tv. Guys, two of my favorite statements from today's conversation with Jordan are, you don't discover your purpose is within you. And then she said, when your insecurities meet your unmet expectations, the pressure to prove yourself manifests. I'm going to say that again. When your insecurities, whatever they are, meet your unmet expectations in life, the pressure to prove yourself manifests. It's a powerful statement. So today, my friend, you have an opportunity to live from your God-given identity instead of trying to discover your identity through the applause of others. Be sure to connect with Jordan on Instagram. She's at Jordan Lee Dooley. And hey, if today's conversation resonated with you and you know it'd help a friend, I want you to text 5 people right now and share this episode, whether on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google, and encourage them to listen and own their everyday too. Well, hey, next week on the show, I'm joined by Joshua Becker, who's going to teach all of us how to become a minimalist and cut the clutter that so easily distracts us from living the life we were created to live. Here's a preview.
Like, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to accomplish? That Saturday morning, for me, it was, man, I don't want to spend the rest of my life taking care of stuff that I don't need. I want to spend my life being a good father. And I was a pastor at the time. I want to be a better pastor, and I want to reach more people and help more people. Once I started seeing how owning less allowed me to walk more fully in those pursuits and in those passions, that was the draw of minimalism. And it became my definition of minimalism. Minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things we most value by removing anything that distracts us from it, which is a very purpose-based approach to the lifestyle.
That's next week right here on Win Today. Joshua Becker from Becoming Minimalist is here. We're going to have a really practical conversation about how to declutter your life so that what matters most comes to the surface of your priorities. It's going to be really good. Hey, many of you are brand new listeners of Win Today, and for that, I just want to say thank you. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now on whichever podcast host you're tuning into. And each and every week, a fresh episode of the show will arrive to you automatically. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, will you take 30 seconds right now to rate and write a review of the show? Doing so helps grow the listenership of Win Today, and that would mean so much to me. Well, hey, until next week, visit me over at wintoday.tv for blog posts and archive podcasts, all aimed at helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.